How do you feel about your butt?
Are you kidding me? You did not just ask me that.
I did.
You didn't.
I did.
I mean,
People
I
talk
feel like
about
I'm
it
insane.
forever, and I want to know.
30 years. 3 decades of standing in somebody's living room every weekday afternoon, telling them what was happening in Hollywood, who was dating who, which star had just been photographed looking rough at a petrol station in Malibu, which upcoming film was being described as a quote masterpiece by the studio's own press release. 30 years of red carpets and exclusive interviews and breathless exclusives about nothing that would matter the following Tuesday. And on Friday the 13th of March 2026, NBC Universal walked in, put the whole operation on the table and cancelled it. Access Hollywood is done. If you have a passing relationship with celebrity news, you probably heard that and thought, so what? A showbiz gossip program got axed. Happens every year. But this cancellation is not really about a show. It is about the complete and formal abandonment of a business model that has shaped how entertainment news reaches ordinary people for the better part of 40 years. NBC Universal is not just cancelling Access Hollywood. They are shutting down their entire first-run syndication operation. Every show they make in-house and distribute to local stations across America, finished. Done producing. The machinery that built it is being switched off. And Access Hollywood, which was practically the founding argument for that machinery, happens to be the last thing still standing when the lights go out. That is not nothing. That is a very specific ending to a very specific era, and it deserves to be understood properly. So let's talk about what Access Hollywood actually was, where it came from, what happened to it along the way, and what its death tells us about where television is heading and has already arrived. Because the show's last few months of production begin in September, and when they roll those cameras for the final time, something structural about the American television industry goes with it. To understand why Access Hollywood existed at all, you have to understand what was already dominating daytime television when NBC decided to launch it in 1996. Entertainment Tonight had been on the air since 1981, produced by CBS, and it had essentially invented the format. Celebrity news, packaged like journalism, delivered in 30 minutes, syndicated to local stations across the country. By the mid-90s, it was one of the most watched syndicated shows in America and one of the most profitable. CBS had spent 15 years refining the formula and protecting the territory. If you wanted your entertainment news fix every evening, Entertainment Tonight was where you went, and there was really nowhere else. NBC decided they wanted a piece of that. The man they turned to was Jim Van Messel, who had actually worked as an executive producer at Entertainment Tonight before crossing the aisle. He knew the format inside out, and more importantly, he knew the weaknesses. He knew where Entertainment Tonight was playing it safe, where it was slow, where it was getting too respectable for its own good. So when NBC commissioned him to build a rival, Van Messel built something designed to be scrappier, faster, more accessible. Access Hollywood launched on the 9th of September 1996 with Giselle Fernandez and Larry Menter in the hosting chairs. Fernandez, a veteran broadcaster who had worked at CBS News and done stints across multiple networks, gave the show credibility. Menter, a Philadelphia news anchor with matinee idol hair and a tendency to fill every available inch of a camera frame with personality, gave it energy. He lasted 1 season. Fernandez stayed longer, eventually sharing the desk with Pat O'Brien, who was already a recognizable name from CBS Sports and would go on to become one of the show's defining faces for nearly a decade. The genius of the syndication model, and it really was a kind of genius, was the economics. Rather than airing on a single network with a single set of affiliates and a single advertising structure, a syndicated show is sold on a market-by-market basis. The producer goes to each local station individually and pitches the program. The station buys the rights and airs it whenever suits their schedule. In exchange, the production company keeps a portion of the advertising inventory in each market. This means a show can be on the air in Los Angeles at 6 in the evening, and in Milwaukee at 3 in the afternoon, and in Atlanta at 10 at night, all at the same time, all pulling in local advertising money, all feeding revenue back to the parent company. Oprah Winfrey built an empire on it. Dr. Phil built a career on it. Jerry Springer built a dynasty on it before Steve Wilkos, the show's former head of security, who was famous for physically separating brawling guests, spun off into his own show in 2007 and ran it for 19 seasons. The model worked because local stations needed content to fill their schedules. Producers needed distribution without being beholden to a single network, and advertisers got access to local markets at a reasonable cost. Everyone had something to gain. For a long time, it was one of the best deals in television. Access Hollywood thrived inside that model. The show rotated through a remarkable number of hosts across its run. Nancy O'Dell, who had been an original co-anchor and would later go on to anchor Entertainment Tonight itself, did multiple stints. Maria Menounos, who combined genuine journalistic instincts with the kind of warmth that cameras tend to love, spent years there. Natalie Morales, who later became an anchor at NBC News, passed through the desk. Jeff Probst, yes, the Survivor host, long before he became synonymous with tribal councils and parchment votes, appeared as a correspondent in the show's early years. And then there was Billy Bush. Bush arrived at Access Hollywood as a correspondent in 2001 and became a primary anchor in 2004. He is a nephew of George H.W. Bush and a cousin of George W. Bush and Jeb Bush, a fact that he navigated with the particular grace of someone who has learned to acknowledge their famous relatives with a disarming smile and then steer the conversation somewhere else. He was, by most accounts, genuinely good at the job. Esquire described him in 2005 as a furious and inventive interviewer, unafraid of playing the fool in exchange for a true reaction. He had the showbiz host's essential gift, which is the ability to make a celebrity feel at ease enough to say something interesting while simultaneously giving the audience the impression they are watching something real rather than something managed. He co-hosted the Miss Universe and Miss USA pageants multiple times. He was everywhere. NBC needed someone charming and recognizable to be. He had also been on a bus in September 2005 with Donald Trump. The tape. If you know anything about Access Hollywood at all, you probably know the tape. Trump was at the time the host of The Apprentice, which aired on NBC, and he had arranged to appear in a cameo on the daytime soap Days of Our Lives as a promotional exercise. Access Hollywood was covering the visit. Bush and Trump were recorded on the bus travelling to the set, a microphone still active, and the conversation that followed would sit in an archive for 11 years before it detonated. The recording features Trump making extraordinarily crude comments about women, bragging about his ability to do whatever he liked because of his celebrity status. Bush is audible throughout, laughing, encouraging, never once pushing back. At the time, Bush says he told a producer about the conversation. Whether anything was done with that information internally is unclear. What is clear is that the tape did not go anywhere in 2005. Access Hollywood was one of NBC's major revenue streams. Trump was one of NBC's biggest stars, and disturbing the arrangement would have cost everyone money. Bush himself put it plainly years later. If the tape had leaked then, heads would have rolled, including his, for killing their major cash cow. So it was filed. It sat there. Then, on the 7th of October 2016, 32 days before a presidential election, The Washington Post published it. The fallout was immediate and asymmetric in a way that still feels almost vertiginous to think about. Bush, who had recently moved from Access Hollywood to a co-hosting role on NBC's Today, was suspended and then fired within 10 days. He described being on a plane to Los Angeles when the story broke. reading the news reports in real time with no way to respond, unable to put two thoughts together, watching his career collapse in a 6-hour window at 30,000 feet. His executive producer, Rob Silverstein, also lost his job. Trump, the man whose words had caused the entire situation, dismissed the recording as locker room talk, issued a brief apology, and went on to win the presidential election the following month. Bush spent 3 years without a major broadcasting role before landing a hosting position at Extra. The show that had made his name continued without him. Trump became president. It is worth sitting with that for a moment, not for political reasons, but for what it reveals about the show's strange position in the culture. Access Hollywood had been built on the premise of proximity. Get close enough to the powerful and famous that viewers feel they are glimpsing something real. But that premise carries a risk. Get too close, and you end up holding a hot microphone when someone powerful says something that should never have been said, and then you have to decide in real time who you actually are. The tape was recorded on Access Hollywood's equipment by Access Hollywood's crew during an Access Hollywood segment, and yet the show survived it, because the show was never really about accountability, it was about access. The clue was always in the name. What actually killed Access Hollywood was slower and considerably less dramatic than an October surprise. It was the steady draining away of the audience that made the syndication model profitable in the first place. Think about what daytime television was in 1996. Streaming did not exist. The internet existed but was not yet a place where you watched anything. If you wanted to see a celebrity talking about their new film, you either read a magazine interview, caught them on a chat show in the evening, or turned on Access Hollywood or Entertainment Tonight in the late afternoon. Those were essentially the only options. The shows had structural monopolies on a certain category of content, and those monopolies produced reliable advertising revenue which covered the costs of production, which kept the shows on the air, which maintained the monopolies. It was self-sustaining. Then everything changed at once, and then kept changing. YouTube gave fans direct access to celebrity content that no production company controlled. Social media made celebrities their own broadcasters. The interview Access Hollywood would have filmed on a red carpet was now happening on Instagram Live before the carpet was even rolled out. Streaming absorbed the television viewing hours that local stations had previously competed for. Podcasts, and specifically video podcasts, started doing what entertainment news programs had always done, but at a fraction of the cost, and with the kind of intimacy that a slick syndicated format struggles to replicate. The audience didn't disappear. They moved somewhere else, somewhere faster and cheaper and more immediate, where the celebrity wasn't mediated by a host in a suit. Local TV stations felt this first and most acutely. They are the ones who buy syndicated programming, and they are the ones who started noticing that the audiences justifying the license fees were thinning out year by year. Frank Sheecher, the head of programming for Fox TV stations, said publicly that the audience levels these shows were pulling in could no longer justify what it cost to put them on the air. That is not a political statement. That is arithmetic. When the maths stop working, the show stops working. NBC Universal had been watching this arithmetic for years. Access Hollywood was hit by layoffs as recently as last autumn, partially in connection with the cancellation of E!News' daily broadcast, which ended in September 2025 after a 33-year run. E! had been the other major pillar of celebrity news television, the channel that gave the world the Kardashians and the red carpet pre-show that became its own cultural institution. And when that daily news operation folded, it sent a signal about the state of the whole sector. The remaining players in the celebrity news space on television are still standing: Entertainment Tonight, Inside Edition, Extra. But the field is much reduced from its peak, and every one of those survivors is fighting for a shrinking pool of linear television viewers. NBC Universal's announcement on Friday the 13th came in the form of a statement from Francis Barrick, who chairs Bravo and Peacock, unscripted content, and has oversight of the syndication unit. The language was impeccably corporate. The company would be making changes to the first-run syndication division to better align with the programming preferences of local stations. It would remain active in distribution of existing library content. The shows had provided great entertainment for many years, and the teams behind them were a source of pride. It is the kind of statement that says the thing it needs to say while avoiding any phrase that could appear in a headline. What it actually means, stripped of the boardroom phrasing, is that NBC Universal has concluded that the business of producing new television for syndication is over. Not troubled, not difficult, not requiring adjustment. Over. Access Hollywood will film its final episodes through September 2026, which would have been its 30th anniversary. Mario Lopez, who has been the show's anchor since 2019 and carries a certain professional optimism in everything he does that makes him almost constitutionally unsuited to cancellation announcements, will presumably see the show to its end along with Kit Hoover, who has been at the desk since 2010 and is, by any measure, the longest-serving current host in the show's history. Scott Evans, younger brother of actor Chris Evans, joined in 2019. Zuri Hall, who arrived the same year, had a background in music before moving into broadcasting. They are a team that inherited a show with complicated baggage and made it work, only to now be facing the camera for the last few months of a 30-year run they didn't start. The Steve Wilkos Show has already completed production on its 19th season. Karamo, hosted by Karamo Brown, who came to fame on Netflix's Queer Eye and won 2 Emmy Awards for that work, finished its 4th season and will not get a 5th. The Kelly Clarkson Show, which was NBC Universal's highest-profile daytime vehicle and one of the few consistently strong performers in the syndicated space, it won multiple Emmy Awards during its run, was already announced as ending after its current 7th season, with Clarkson citing the need to spend more time with her children following the death of their father, Brandon Blackstock, who died from melanoma in 2025 at 48 years old. Sherri Shepherd's show, separately produced by Debmar Mercury, was cancelled earlier this year after 4 seasons. No new syndicated talk show has been announced to replace any of them. There is no cavalry coming. The TVREV analysis put it with particular directness. The rise of streaming has disaggregated the audience. Appointment viewing is fading. Younger viewers don't know what time these shows air, or even what channel carries them. For years, syndication survived by serving an older audience that hadn't yet cut the cord. But as that demographic has grown more comfortable with digital platforms, the economics that sustained a $300,000 a week production operation have stopped making sense. The dedicated first-run syndication studio model, NBC Universal's words, not mine, is no longer viable. What is particularly striking about the Access Hollywood cancellation is what survives it. The biggest player in celebrity television news, Entertainment Tonight, is still in production over at CBS. Inside Edition is still on the air and just installed a new anchor, GMA3's Eva Pilgrim, signalling confidence in its future. Extra is still going and recently brought on Dancing with the Stars fixture Derek Hough as its new host. Live with Kelly and Mark remains the #1 daytime entertainment talk show in America. The Drew Barrymore Show and the Jennifer Hudson Show have both been renewed, so the market for this kind of content has not evaporated. What has evaporated is the specifically NBC Universal version of it. The version that required a large production infrastructure, a dedicated syndication sales team, and a guaranteed return that the current advertising market no longer provides. The difference between the shows that are surviving and the ones that are not seems to come down to a very specific question. Does the show have something that isn't replaceable by a podcast or a YouTube channel? Live with Kelly and Mark has a kind of live morning atmosphere that feels genuinely different to anything produced on demand. The View has genuine conflict and genuine stakes. Entertainment Tonight has 50 years of brand equity and a relationship with the Hollywood studios that runs deeper than a contract. What Access Hollywood had was access, and access, as it turns out, is the one thing that celebrity culture has now made available everywhere. There is something melancholy about a show being killed by the very thing it helped create. Access Hollywood spent 30 years teaching audiences to want proximity to celebrity. It trained viewers to expect that they could get close, that the barrier between the famous and the watching public was permeable, that a camera and a host and a broadcast slot were all you needed to get someone to open up. And then the internet arrived and made that proximity freely available to everyone, without a host, or a broadcast slot, or a crew, or a licensing fee. The show built the appetite it couldn't satisfy. The Access Hollywood tape will outlive Access Hollywood. The recording made on that bus in September 2005, which sat in an archive for 11 years, which surfaced 32 days before a presidential election and ended one man's career while leaving another's intact, has become one of the most significant pieces of audio in recent American political history. The show attached to that tape will be gone by autumn. The man at the center of it is serving his second term in the White House, and the industry that produced both of them, the daytime syndication business that sold proximity as a product for 40 years, is in its final season. September will be Access Hollywood's last month of filming, and its last episode will air sometime after that. There will be a tribute reel, almost certainly, and the assembled hosts will say something warm about the privilege of 3 decades. Then the cameras will stop rolling, and another corner of the television landscape will be given over to something that costs less to produce, reaches more people, and doesn't require a studio in Stamford, Connecticut. That is not a verdict on the people who made the show or watched it. It is simply what happens when the conditions that made something possible stop existing. The conditions have stopped existing. 30 years is a long time to stand in someone's living room. But every visit ends eventually.